give them some credit. There is one nutcase who has one website in New York who posted a picture on his website of what happened to Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker, who made a film about the oppression of Muslim women in the city of Amsterdam, and who was ritually murdered in the street, having been shot off his bicycle. He was gutted like a sheep in the roadway, and a knife plunged into his heart, which held attached to it a letter, an open letter, to another good friend of mine, Miss Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whose wonderful new book, Nomad, is about to be published, telling her, as an elected member of the Dutch Parliament and a refugee from Somalia and from genital mutilation and from forced marriage and from sectarian warfare and religious theocratic oppression, that she was next. And she now lives in this country, and I can't even tell you where anymore, because she too, like so many of my friends now in Europe and the United States, has to go around with a permanent bodyguard. Whereas the people who put Theo van Gogh's picture on their website and say to the makers of Comedy Central, this is going to happen to you, signed revolutionmuslim.com, don't appear to feel any kind of fear at all. They seem to feel, as perhaps they are, that the First Amendment protects them too. Well, if it does, and if this great architecture of free speech, if this constitutional roof under which we've all been thriving so proudly for so long is to mean anything, then we're going to have to say revolution.com cannot close down an American cable channel at whim by making a little bit of a threat. So the question comes right back to where I suppose I initiated it, which is, it's no longer a hypothetical one. You're not being asked, what would you do when the climate of fear began to spread, and when even people you thought to be reliable and brave will remember urgent appointments elsewhere and say, well, perhaps this particular meeting I could skip, or maybe that petition isn't so vitally important. After all, I've signed so many petitions in my time, I can miss one. And anyway, Captain Alfred Dreyfus always looked a bit of a seedy character to me, rather suspicious-looking type. You know, maybe we should pick our fights with more care. You can feel the air, the atmosphere thickening with excuses and with euphemisms. No, the question is, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about it? Now, if what I was just told is true, the ranks of this very hall this evening were thinned, not by the prospect of having myself instead of Sherman Alexie, forbidding enough as it is, but by a fizzled nothing of a bomb in Times Square. Look, you are the children of a revolution. The United States did have to go through a great deal to erect this architecture of constitutional freedom and protection. People in living memory died to register to vote, to be able to hold a public meeting, to be able to assert their most basic and elementary rights. And we celebrate them every year, and we all wish we could have been there, and we weren't. But we can be, because there'll always be a time, a rendezvous with this question, and everyone's going to measure themselves, as Arthur Miller did, by how they shape up to it. So I can now, if I haven't made my point by now, I'm not going to have made it, am I? And I think I've probably about trespassed on the point where Salman and I were going to talk, and then you can be our prisoners for a bit longer, and then we'll be your hostage. And so this would be the moment perhaps to invite back on the stage someone who has witnessed for this. I've talked a lot about it, but Salman's done a lot of it too. Here you are, old horse.
Yeah.
Over to you.
All right, well...
Yes. Away with Abe.
Yes, thanks, Christopher. I'm just going to, in some random way, respond to a few of the things you said, and then we can... let's talk about the cartoons a bit more, because it seems to me that there's two separate issues about things like the Danish cartoons which get conflated. One is the question about should the cartoons have been published in the first place. Now, it seems to me any newspaper editor, anybody on a picture desk of a newspaper or a magazine, every day is presented with material where they have to make the decision, is this worth putting in the magazine or not? And I think we can also agree that maybe no two picture editors would make the same decisions. Some of them would print all those things, some of them would print one or two, some of them would print none of them. So on the one hand, you've got the argument about quality and so on, should the things be in the paper?
Yes.
Myself, I think that most of them were rather tedious, and the ones that weren't were actually the most offensive ones. I mean, the best cartoon was the one which shows suicide bombers arriving at the pearly gates.
Yes.
To be greeted by the Prophet Muhammad saying, "Would you please stop doing it because we're running out of virgins?"
Yes.
Now, that has the great merit of being funny.
That has a bit of bite to it.
Yeah. And actually, the one with the turban, the bomb in the turban, was similarly, a perfectly legitimate, strong, satirical point.
And well drawn.
And well drawn. And so those two, the ones that people got most exercised about, would actually be the ones that I would, if I were the picture editor, that I would have published, and many of the others were just beyond bland. So that's one issue. Would you do it, would you not do it? But it seems to me that there's the second issue, which is what you were talking about, I think, is what happens when the subject of violence arises. And at that point, it seems to me the subject changes. The subject is no longer about whether you should publish or not publish these things, but about how do you respond to violence.
Yes.
Do you respond to it with cowardice or courage? And at that point, it seems to me that every newspaper in the world should publish the Danish cartoons. Not because they like them, and not actually because they particularly want to insult Islam, but just to make the point that you don't give in to threats.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes, when people start talking about the cartoons as objects, were they good or bad, were they offensive or inoffensive, that's one half of the point. But the second half of the point is the question of the response to violence. And I think that's one of the things that has got very blurred recently.
Well, should I comment?
Yeah.
Well, first, do you know what happens to Muhammad Atta when he blows himself up and arrives at the pearly gates? You don't know? Well, he was told, "Okay, welcome. Let's see, who don't you know? Here's Mr. Thomas Jefferson." Here's Mr. James Madison. Shakes his hand. Have you met Mr. George Mason? Shakes his hand. Mr. Patrick Henry. "Okay, Patrick Henry, what is this?" He said, "Well, you did ask for 72 Virginians."
There's even a better thing.
I was afraid this might happen.
This is, I'm now not kidding, serious Islamic scholarship has recently suggested that the 72 virgins was a mistranslation of the original, and then what was actually supposed to greet people on their arrival as martyrs was 72 raisins.
Yeah. Raisins or white grapes. There's a Syro-Aramaic mistranslation of the Quran that appears to have done a lot of damage.
I think one of the few good reasons for believing in the afterlife is wanting to see the faces of Muhammad Atta and company arriving in heaven to be handed a bowl of raisins.
Yeah. It also adds to the strong case for saying that holy books are in fact man-made and not dictated by God, which is, I think, a good part of this discussion. Look, remember, the origin of the Danish question was this. It was proposed in Denmark, which was doing its level best, as many societies have, to make Muslims feel welcome in Danish society. It was thought the world's school children should learn about Islam. We should have a book for kids, a cartoon book, all you need to know, Islam for beginners kind of thing. But they couldn't get any children's cartoonists to do it because they were afraid of making a mistake, of upsetting someone. So it was to satirize this reticence and this fear that Fleming Rose, my friend, the editor of G-Line's Post, and said, "All right, let's have a cartoonist competition and see if we can represent the Prophet." So it begins with this reticence. The second thing is, you're right, of course, that people should do it out of solidarity. And you're right, of course, that it's a judgment call in point of taste in the first instance. But once it's become a matter of violence and controversy, there's a second stage where you have to report it.
Yes, you do.
Which everybody did on the front page, except they reported it without the content.
Yeah.
Let's do it without the picture. I can't really think of a parallel of what... I mean, they would say, well, Picasso's gone too far with Guernica. He's taken an obviously propagandistic attitude towards the Spanish Civil War. There's a huge row about this painting. You'd be very interested to know more about it, but unfortunately we can't show you what it looks like, because that would be inviting reprisal from Franco or something. I can't think of a bit even worse now. Was everything is image. Everything is imagery.
And one of the most, I think, mealy-mouthed pieces of language that is developed to justify this